This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Into the Atlanta Football Party. I'm your host, Jarvis Davis, and ride with me today, I have my main man, Aaron Freeman, who is the host of Locked On Falcons, and I have Tori McElhaney in the building/studio, who is the senior writer for AtlantaFalcons.com. I want to start by saying thank you for making the Atlanta Football Party part of the your first listen of the day, and we are free and available wherever you download your podcast. And wherever you download your podcast, make sure that you leave us a 5-star review. Really appreciate that from you in advance. The Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200, not $150, $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Now, coming up on today's show, the need the Falcons have that we aren't talking about, and did the Falcons just sign Younghoe Koo's replacement? But first, we have to talk about what's on the board for this defense. We've talked about how much the talent that the Falcons need to add in order to be able to have some type of semblance of a capable defense to pair with this offense, who I'm almost at the point where I'm gonna do a free guarantee they're gonna have to score 26 points a game. I'm almost there. I'm not quite free, but I'm almost there. But I think that, when Jeff Ulbrich was hired, a lot of people started talking about him getting familiar with this, being back in this thing, and saying being a different man now, with his time in New York, and how that helped him a lot. But I think one of the things that kind of flew under the radar was the hiring of Nate Ollie, right? So we haven't heard from him just yet. Hopefully we get a chance to hear from him in the spring with OTAs, when they have the assistant coaches made available. But for you, Tori, how do you feel about the addition of Nate Ollie and how vital it is to help Jeff Ulbrich to have some type of impact in his first year as defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons?
Yeah, I kind of just where we are right now in the offseason and kind of the free agency period that was relatively quiet, and then you lose someone like Grady Jarrett in free agency, and it's this whole, what's the saying that it's like the Jims and Joes versus the X's and O's. Like, I think sometimes like the X's and O's, the coaches, all of those things can be what they are. But if you don't have the guys to go out and overpower an offensive tackle, then it doesn't matter. You can have the best scheme. This is something that Dean Pease told me back in the day. He was like, you can have the best scheme in the world. He was like, you can have the best game adjustments in the world. But if at the end of the day, sometimes if you just don't have a guy who can go out and win 1v1, you're not going to go anywhere. And that's kind of like to the question of like Nate Ollie and his impact and in this Jeff Ulbrich scheme and Jeff Ulbrich's impact within this defense. It's like, I'm at the point right now where it's like they could have the best scheme in the world. They could be so creative and do so many things, but if you don't have the guys who can go out and execute that and go out and perform, then what does any of it matter? And I don't want to use that as like a cop-out to not answer the question of how like someone like Nate Ollie can help, because I do think he can help, and I think that he has kind of a history and a skill set that pairs very well. I mean, there's a reason why Jeff Ulbrich wanted Nate Ollie to be a part of this defensive coaching staff. But that's all well and good. But if you don't have a guy who can go win, then you're kind of just like, all right, guys, like here's kind of the plate. Take what you want, eat what you want. But I don't know. That's kind of just where I am right now with this defense in totality.
Yeah, you know what? And I think you make a great point when you talk about that resume, because it looks really well, right? He 2 different times, 2 separate occasions, he led, coached a group that was top 5 in sacks, and specifically in 2023 with the Colts, he had 3 different guys have career highs in sacks. We talk about Leonard Floyd, I want to get my career high. I'm like, oh man, I would love to see a career high from Arnie Ebiketie, Leonard Floyd, and whatever player that the free guarantee is going to bring in on the first round with the 15th overall pick. Have you heard about the free guarantee, Tori, by the way?
No.
So Aaron has said that the Falcons are definitely 1,000% are going to draft an edge rusher in the first round of the draft. So there's no even point of us talking about whether or not the position. Saying because it's going down and it's been deemed the free guarantee by Maria Martin. I know you're very familiar with Maria. So, that's the free guarantee. So I'm almost at the point where the free guarantee is where I stand when it comes to this offense and 26 points per game, but I haven't quite gotten there just yet. But I think one of the things that, Free, when I think about what you, as far as your thoughts, as far as what Nate Ollie can bring to the table, I think there is something I feel that is there because, Jimmy's and Joe's, I've always subscribed to that. But I think that when one of the reasons why I felt like Jay Rogers should not have come back as a defensive line coach was because there needs to be an emphasis on certain things when it comes to that coaching spot, right? Like guys have to be reminded of constantly of, okay, here's what you do in this particular situation. Here's what you need to do as far as putting your hands on players and getting off of blocks. Here's what my philosophy is. And I think that Nate Ollie can potentially bring that to the table. But so what are your thoughts as far as what you feel his impact is going to be in year one? Because we know Jeff Ulbrich has to hit the ground running as a first-year defense coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons.
Well, I think both you and Tori have pointed out he's had a lot of success in this league, but I think a lot of it, as Tori said, I tend to subscribe to the same theory of it's really about the Jimmys and Joes more so than the X's and O's. But as we saw in Indianapolis, like when he had talent, those defensive lines were successful. You have a guy like DeForest Buckner, you bring in a guy like Yannick Ngakoue, and you're able to get sort of that was his last good year in 2022 with the Colts as a productive pass rusher. You replace him with Samson Ebukam the following year, and he has sort of career highs. So it does feel like if Nate Ollie has the pieces that he can get the most out of that. And again, that to me is the big question for this Falcons defensive front. Like, do they have the pieces? Can he get, ring out the last little bit of production from Leonard Floyd at this age? Can he get more out of Arnold Ebiketie, as we saw with, Dayo Odeyingbo, who just got paid by the Bears, steadily get better over the course of his time under Nate Ollie. Same thing with Kwity Paye and whatnot. So I do feel like the potential is there for Nate Ollie to have a significant impact on this defensive line, outperforming sort of what I think is probably most people, including my own, sort of low expectations at this point in time. But like, it is one of those things. It's like, does that lead to the Falcons having a good defensive line, or does that lead to the Falcons just having like an okay defensive line? I think those are sort of the questions at this point in time. And I think, talking about the free guarantee, I think we'll have a better idea based around, that first round pick that we know 100% certainty is going to be the pick. I don't even know why Tori's going through the motions of going through these mock drafts every single week and not picking a pass rusher. So it's just like, I don't get that whole thing, but she's got words to write. So, we let Tori do her own thing, but we know at the end of the day, the Falcons are definitely taking the first round pick in this 2025 draft.
And that's the interesting thing, right? I feel as we continue to go through this offseason, and man, April will be here tomorrow. For those, we're recording this podcast on the last day of March, on a good Monday, and I think the sense of urgency as far as like I'm at a spot now where I'm like, okay, how I'm desperate to try to find like, okay, what can give these guys a jump? What can give these guys that last little push to kind of get over the top? Because, Arnold Ebiketie has kind of been hovering around that 5-6 sack type deal. We've seen the potential, right? But it hasn't like fully flourished. I feel like Ollie is that guy that can potentially bring that out of him, right? So, because playing up front like that, I just feel like I just think back to when I was in college and I was always talking about my coach, like as far as like coverages and everything like that, and just having those conversations with him. It's just like, all right, we only run 1 or 2 coverages. So why are we so successful, man? Because those type of questions I used to ask, I was kind of I was a question asker, when it comes to watching film and all that stuff. It's just like, well, and one of the things that really just kind of threw me off, or to kind of had me started thinking about it from as far as when I came to the Falcons, like, all right, we taught you guys to be able to do this particular defense, this style of play, a 2-gap defense. We want you to run that to perfection. And once we got you to a point where you were running it to perfection, we don't have to play that many coverages because we're so dominant against the run. And I think that when you don't have a set type of style of play or a set way of doing things, I feel like a lot of guys start to find themselves kind of like doing their own thing, which we kind of saw a little bit of that up front last year as well. So I think this is going to be very interesting as to what Nate Ollie brings to the table. But I want to kind of get your thoughts on this too, Tori. When you think about not only what Nate Ollie brings in it, of course, I understand it's about the Jimmys and Joes, but do you feel that Ulbrich saying, hey, we're going to be multiple in this scheme, do you feel like, based off of kind of what I was saying as far as like knowing what you are going to do or knowing what type of way you want to play, do you feel like him saying that multiple scheme is going to be something that ultimately comes back to bite them if they don't really establish themselves of who they are and what they want to do on the defensive side of the football?
See, to me, that like being multiple and like the identity of which you play with are two different things. I think that when it comes to scheme in this day and age, you have to be multiple. Like if you were to go out there and only play a base 3-4 all the time, every single down, like offenses are going to tear you apart. Sure. So I feel like the idea of multiplicity is kind of synonymous with the way that the game is going and the scheme of which teams are deploying to account for what offenses have become in the last 20 years. But to your question, I think the question is about identity, and the question is about the role of which someone plays within a scheme and feeling confident in what they know themselves to be, but also what is being asked of them by the coaching staff. And I think that there can be an identity within multiplicity, but also at the exact same time, I think that like for a lot of these guys, they've had a different defensive coordinator for the last, every year it's been a different guy for the last, 4 years. So I think if you're someone like Arnold Ebiketie, that's really difficult because every guy is going to come in and they're going to say that we want to be multiple, but every guy is also going to come in with his own way of teaching things, his own way of deploying things, his own way of calling the game. And I think that's really hard as a young edge rusher, specifically using the example of Arnold Ebiketie, to really put your foot in the ground and figure out who you are in this league and what works for you. I think it's really difficult to do that when things are changing as often as what they are. I think that can be a disservice to a developing and growing player, which the Falcons, when they drafted Arnold Ebiketie, felt like he was on an upward trajectory from what he was in college. So
we talk about the same time with same thing with quarterbacks too, right? Like right. I feel like you should. I'm with you. I'm wholeheartedly with you. Yeah.
I think that like the reason why I think the Falcons have been so good running the ball, if we're switching it to offense with Bijan and Tyler in this offensive line, is because there has been a significant level of consistency from not only personnel, but what they're being asked to do over the last 3 seasons specifically, regardless of who is play calling. So I think that hasn't really transferred over to this defense, and that's kind of been at the detriment of some of these younger players that to like Arnold Ebiketie, who you're seeing flashes and you're seeing moments, but when things are changing so quickly and so often, how does that have an impact on a developing guy? And I think that's the question more so than like multiplicity versus kind of like identity.
Yeah, I think Tori makes a great point with talking about identity, because I think about with those Dan Quinn defenses, when they were at their best, they were a defense that they were going to play zone on early downs, but when push came to shove on third downs, they were going to man you up. And with the players they had in the secondary at their peaks in like 2016 and 2017, with Desmond Trufant and Robert Alford and Keanu Neal and Ricardo Allen, et cetera, Brian Poole. They were able to successfully accomplish that sort of identity. And I think that's going to be the challenge for this team right now is like, what is their identity going to be? Sort of when I look at this current personnel, I kind of look at guys like Caden Ellis and Arnold O'Kenny and Leonard Floyd and Morgan Fox. And I say, okay, like this is not the sort of typical pass rush where you can just say, we're just going to put 4 guys on the line of scrimmage and they're going to be able to get at the quarterback. We're going to have to be aggressive to supplement our pass rush with a lot of blitzes. And we saw that work to a certain degree with the Falcons, with a lot of their simulated pressures after the bye week last year. So I think that identity can work, but I still feel like the Falcons probably still needed a few more pieces, which they should be able to acquire in the draft in order to execute that identity. But I think that's going to be the challenge for this team. Every good defense in the NFL has an identity when you say like, oh, when you face this team, you got to deal with this. You got to deal with X, Y, and Z. And like the Falcons haven't really been able to achieve that as we sit here these last couple of years, and hopefully that they'll be able to turn that corner this year with Jeff Ulbrich, and sort of that will be one of the interesting things to find out this year.
Football players love clearly defined roles. They love being told what to do. I promise you. It may not seem like it, but they love being told what to do when it comes to what do you need me to do, coach? All right, cool. I'm good. Now let's go out there and find, and I think identity versus scheme, it makes all the sense in the world, T, when you mention it, because this is, I feel like being able to communicate that to your young players specifically, because I remember watching a video of Najee Harris when he was talking about coming into the league and just the offense and just being there with quarterbacks that not necessarily he knows that they weren't going to be around for quite some time, and it just not understanding his role and not being talked to in a way where their role is clearly defined, and we know who is the offensive coordinator up there right now. There's communication is so big when it comes to the when you get to this level. So I feel if Ulbrich and Ollie are able to, with the young guys coming in with the free guarantee in the first round, and shoot, I wouldn't mind if they doubled up in the second round as well. If you tell those guys what you need from them and what the expectations are, I feel like that will be a path to getting the most production out of all the guys that not only that you have on the roster, but the young guys coming in as well. Coming up next, did the Falcons sign Younghoe Koo's replacement? We'll talk about it. This episode of the Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. Oh my goodness, y'all, we are on one today. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action. There are 4 teams that are left, and I don't know if you guys know who those teams are. It's all chalk, baby. I'm talking about number 1 seeds all over the doggone place. So I need you to go right now and find out that, hey, customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in extra bucks, and to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories. Ain't no Cinderella stories going on in this bad boy. And even who's going to be cutting down the nets. I think the Duke Blue Devils are going to do it. They just look like that team this year. And one thing that you also need to check out, guys, make sure you stay in on the action with tournament games happening. There's always something exciting to bet on. So make sure you keep your eye on these games, because the FanDuel app is so simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around on my money, trying to knock on anybody's door, chasing anybody down. None of that. You get your money right away. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. I want to thank you for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen today. Why don't you stop by Locked On Falcons and make that your second listen today? Aaron Freeman is an excellent host. He's just so wonderful and so gracious. So make sure you give him some time, because he will make it worth your while. And also check out Tori on lighthearted.com as well. She's about to get ready to go down to the NFL owners meetings. We're going to talk about a little bit later about why Raheem Morris missed his flight. Gonna be a little speculation going on, but
Tori may miss her flight too. So.
and we definitely don't want to do that. So, but we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later. But first, we got to get into the Falcons just being wild at this International Pro Day Combine by Lenny Krieg, and they signed him to a 3-year contract the following day. Now, reports are that he had several visits lined up, but he's decided to go with the Falcons, after the first round. I have a couple of instances as to why that might be the case, but we ain't gonna talk about that right now. We're gonna wait till the season gets a little bit closer so I can kind of give you my thoughts on as to why this man signed with the Atlanta Falcons instead of going somewhere else to go try to get a visit. But to you, Free, when you think about the Falcons signing Lenny Krieg, German-born player, he played overseas, right, and had some good seasons, and he put on a show at the Combine, went perfect, working out in front of all those teams and everything. Do you feel like this is competition, or do you feel like, hey, the Falcons signed this dude because they know that, hey, this guy, he can be the guy for them, and when the season kicks off in September?
I think it's mostly competition, but I think certainly the Falcons are looking at Lenny Krieg being 22 years old and, and looking at the potential that, if Lenny Krieg comes out this summer and balls out and Younghoe Koo continues with the sort of inconsistency that he showed last year, there may be a changing of the guard at the kicker position. So I do feel like that is a possibility. I don't think it's a likelihood at this point in time, but I do certainly think that's a possibility. Given Lenny Krieg's upside and whatnot. So I think this is mostly competition. I think when you look at sort of Lenny Krieg's stats from his time in the European League, they're not necessarily stats that blow you away in terms of like, oh, this guy is definitely an NFL kicker playing at a low level of competition. But I think the hope with what the Falcons saw at the Combine and at the Pro Day, whatever those issues that Lenny Krieg had in Europe playing in Germany for the Stuttgart Surge, are the arrows pointing up for him. So I do feel like this will be good competition for Younghoe Koo, and give the Falcons an insurance policy. And I think the fact that he's also an international player makes it a little bit easier for the Falcons to potentially stash him on their practice squad if need be. So this is, to me, a pretty good plan B. We've seen the Falcons invest a lot of resources in their special teams this offseason. And I think you could probably argue that this is maybe potentially the biggest investment and the best investment that they've made so far.
And I know, because I know for me, man, I know you were a little bit more, softer on Koo and more so, hey, man, this guy's done so much for the organization. We need to chill out. Because I had my pitchfork out after that Saints game. I did. I would readily admit that.
For the Saints game, but yeah, sure.
Because I'm real big on, and some people to a fault sometimes that I'm real big on what have you done for me lately, especially in the NFL, because you can compile up so many losses. You can go back and look at all the losses for the Falcons. You're like, all right, if you would have done this right here, or hey, they would have brought someone in earlier to come in and kick for the Falcons, maybe they could have won this game, and that. We know that could have been a difference between them winning the division and being on the outside looking in like they were. So, but for you, Tori, do you look at this signing of Lenny Krieg and say, hey, this is pure competition? We said that we're going to bring in competition at all positions, and they started off with the kicker right here. We're going to sign this dude to a 3-year deal. Or do you look at this as, all right, we understand where Younghoe Koo is in his career, and he had one of his worst seasons ever last year, and this is his eventual replacement?
So I'm with Free. I think that it's competition. I think that Younghoe Koo, considering the history that the Falcons have had with him, he has earned the right to compete for the position.
Sure.
I think that he last year did not. I mean, it's obvious he did not perform to the way that, one, I think you expect Younghoe Koo to perform, and two, the way you need him to perform and what you need from that position. And you can't leave points on the field. You just can't. And not in this league where things come down to a 1-score game. But I say all of that to say that I think that when you look at the way that the Falcons have kind of brought in competition. I think it's actually really smart. I think for you made mention to it about like, this is a guy who is a part of the international track, which means that he doesn't count towards the 90. And I think that that's actually a very important way that the Falcons are kind of bringing in competition for Young Waku, someone who I think was pretty hot on the market the last month. And the Falcons had, I guess, the selling points, and they found a way to do it to get him to Atlanta and to kind of almost be, I'm sure the pitch was like, hey man, you're going to go out and you're going to compete for the job. And if you win, you have the job. Like, I think that was one. I don't know all the other teams that were potentially interested in him, sure. But I can imagine that there were probably some places that weren't as, hey, this is open competition. You can come in and you can be the guy if you win this competition. Like, I don't know how many teams were offering him that opportunity. So I think that plays into it as well. I'm curious to see how this thing plays out because, you know, Young Waku was put on injured reserve with a right hip injury. I don't know the extent of that injury and how much that was impacting what he wasn't able to do in 2024 and how it was impacting him and his lack of production. Does that go away in 2025? Was it truly if it was truly this like right hip thing that put him on IR, then okay, he should be able to go out and have this competition with Lenny Krieg and be able to blow him out of the water, and he solidifies himself as the Falcons kicker moving forward. Or he doesn't. And when you have someone like Lenny Krieg who has this potential, who's a young guy who you feel good about, that other teams are really interested about, who you feel like is trending in the right direction, then you feel okay there. I think regardless of whatever direction it ultimately ends up going, you feel a bit better and more secure about the kicking situation moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that with this moving forward is the emphasis for me, right? Because we understand all of the turnover that we've seen, you know, on the defensive side of the football. Like, that's going to have to start to have a trickle down effect at some point, because the one sector of this offense that was fine until Kirk said, hey, start hiding injuries, and you know, and then Michael Penix came on the scene and looked pretty solid as well. I feel like where there's non-production, there needs to be change. And I think that for them to bring in a guy like Lenny Krieg, I feel I like that, because they talked about competition. And Terry has always talked about bringing in competition at all positions. And I think he's done a pretty decent job at that when it comes to positions being open and understanding where your needs and holes are, and you at least bringing in guys so you can let those guys battle it out. Like, you know, Aaron, you know, and I have always gone back and forth about Nate Lamon and Troy Anderson for whatever reason being in a position battle. I don't know, a second round pick and undrafted free agent. I just don't understand it. But you know, we ain't gonna get into that today. But I feel this is good. This is good for Young Waku. I feel like if he doesn't take his position in this particular offseason, I feel like this is going to be his eventual replacement for sure. Because if he comes in and continues to do well, obviously, but I like that Raheem Morris at the end of the year was talking about, hey, we didn't make enough kicks. That's what we need to do. And you actually brought someone in here who has a real chance, and not Riley Patterson, you know, and who has a real chance to be your kicker for quite some time. But coming up next, oh man, we've been talking about edge rusher, free guarantees, you know, safety, all that stuff. But is there a position that we haven't been talking about that much that the Falcons need to take a look at in the draft? We'll discuss that next. Right here on Atlanta Football Party. I am Jarvis Davis. I got my main man with me, Aaron Freeman, riding with us. Like we mentioned earlier, hey, Tori McElhaney is headed down to Owners Meetings, so she had to bow out for a little bit. So you just got Aaron and Jarvis for the rest of the show. Oh my gosh, I know you guys are so excited. So if it goes off the rails, it's all Aaron's fault. There we go. All right, now
it is true.
Yes, absolutely, 1000%. So here is the Thursday version of Aaron and Jarvis right here on a good Monday just for you. So, all right, Aaron. So when I look at what the Falcons need from a need standpoint, there are certain positions that obviously immediately pop into your head, right? Edge, corner, edge, and edge, right? So, but I feel like there's a position from that I feel that we aren't talking about just enough. And I want to kind of get your thoughts first, and then I'll let you know mine as far as what the Falcons and Terry Fontenot and all the people in the front office should be taking a look at. So, what is a position for you that you feel that we haven't been talking about that much, but the Falcons need to take a serious look at it to say, hey, this is a position that we might not necessarily need right now, but oh my gosh, we need to take a serious look at it, and potentially bring someone in that can step in that position, not necessarily in the first year of that rookie deal, but maybe in that second year, they might need to be a starter.
Well, I think there is a position that they do need someone right now that you didn't mention as you broke that down is D tackle. I think they need a run plugger. They have not replaced Eddie Goldman on this roster. And I know, people are like, Eddie Goldman, who cares, whatever. But like Eddie Goldman gave this team positive value, both as a run defender and a pass rusher, even though he had limited snaps last year. And right now, like he was rotating with Kentavious Street, who they did bring back. But we know that Kentavious Street is not a starting caliber nose tackle. He's a placeholder type of player. He's a solid rotational piece for this Falcon team, as he has been the last 2 years, but like that's not a starting caliber player. So for me, I think going out there and getting a defensive tackle, big nose tackle type player that can first and foremost stop the run. But, if that player has some pass rushing upside, we're not going to turn that down here in Atlanta at all. But like, I think that is certainly a position of need. Now, when you ask the question of what is a position that the Falcons probably don't need right now, but may need in the future, my immediate attention goes to the opposite side of the ball in the trenches, which is on the offensive line, where you have Ryan Neuzil right now, kind of a placeholder. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about him later in today's episode, but that offensive tackle position, we've talked about this a bunch, Jarvis, over the last couple of months, which is like you have Caleb McGarry going into a contract year. You just gave Jake Matthews a 2-year extension. So you feel like, okay, we're probably good to go at that left tackle spot. And, Caleb McGarry is good enough that you can probably get through this season with him as Michael Penix's blindside protector. We know what the strengths of Caleb McGarry are, run game. We know that this offensive line was built to be a play action heavy type of attack, and the play action offense wasn't quite working for the Falcons, whether it was Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix last year. Hopefully that will change, and that will allow a player like Caleb McGarry not to have to drop back into a straight drop back passing attack 30 plus times a game like he was too often asked to do last year, which leads to some of those issues that we've all seen Caleb McGarry have throughout his 6 years in Atlanta. And so I do feel like that offensive tackle position, the Falcons did bring back Storm Norton, but he's 30 plus, in addition to Caleb McGarry and Jake Matthews being 30 plus. They brought back Brandon Parker, but Brandon Parker didn't do enough in with the Raiders over the years for me to feel like that's a fallback option. So I feel like the Falcons need to draft an offensive tackle just to have an option next year. If they decide to move on from Caleb McGarry and whatnot. So like, to me, that is a position that I think is not a pressing need, because you don't need a plug and play guy right now. But sure, I do feel like investing that resource into that offensive tackle position so that you have a potential fallback option in 2026. And if you're looking at it next year and that you're like, I don't know if this guy's ready to replace Caleb McGarry, then hey, you got a decent backup swing tackle, and you can still go out there and get another offensive tackle in that regard next offseason. So to me, D tackle and offensive tackle are two positions that are kind of flying under the radar. Defensive tackle, I think, there's a obvious need right now. Offensive tackle, it's about looking ahead to the future.
Yeah, I'm so with you on the defensive tackle spot. I start there first. I think this is when you have a guy like Grady Jarrett, walk out that door. And I've said this, time and time again. Grady Jarrett was the guy that opposing teams circled when they came to game planning each and every Sunday, right? What guy to look for? That's the guy that said, hey, we got to stop this guy if we want to have success moving the football on Sunday. And I think that the Falcons don't really have that guy, especially up front, because I mean, I know Jason Bates is a guy to look out for. I get it, but I'm talking about the trenches, man. Like that's what matters. Like you have to have a guy or a guy. If you're talking about the best player on the defense side of football, and it's between AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates, you know, I know who you might lean towards on that one, or Free, but for me, I don't feel like that's a good thing. If you're talking about your DBs, one of your DBs being the best player on your defense side of football, I just don't think that should suffice, right? You shouldn't be satisfied with that. So finding a guy, not to be Grady Jarrett's replacement, because that's too much. That's a lot of pressure. But finding a guy that can come in and be disruptive, a guy that you can focus on him being getting those guys to get in and be able to get those TFLs. And like I said, as you develop and bring your guys along on the outside, on the edge, those defensive tackles are guys that can push that pocket to help them get more sacks. And they can push the pocket, potentially get sacks as well if you have those guys coming off the edge doing what they're supposed to do to keep the quarterback in the pocket. So I'm looking for a basketball team, just like, Leonard Floyd made the analogy in his presser last week about having waves of guys to throw the opposing quarterbacks. And I think thinking about one guy that can be able to do that is not necessarily the way to path to success for me. But yeah, defensive tackle is a guy, and there are some guys that you don't have to take in the first round this year that can potentially come and help you do that. So I think, going into this 2025 draft, you got to think that because we know that they're going to do an edge rusher at 15, but we know it's for a fact it's going down there. But in the second round, there could be some guys that you can take a look at. Maybe a Walter Nolan if he falls, potentially slides. I know Deion Walker, he's a guy that flashes from time to time. Guys who aren't consistent with showing their potential, those guys are going to be available in the mid-round. So those are some of the things that you kind of need to think about when it comes to replacing. But as far as, and for me, my first one was definitely offensive tackle, because there are some guys that in this particular draft, like a Carson Benson, the tackle out of Alabama A&M, who had some good moments during Senior Bowl week, and then he has his moment. He had some other negative moments in the actual game. So I think those are the type of guys you need to be taking a look at, potential guys, and not necessarily have to worry about them coming in from a pressure standpoint. But you mentioned defensive tackle, and I know you've been doing your film work. Is there a defensive tackle for you who you feel that will be the perfect fit for the Falcons in the draft at the end of this month?
I think if you're looking for a potential Grady Jarrett replacement, I do really like Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. I do feel like he has probably the most upside as a pass rushing defensive tackle that I've seen in this draft class. And he is certainly a guy that I think should be on the Falcons' radar. But for me, I feel like the Falcons drafted a bunch of guys last year in the last couple of years that have some pass rushing ability, whether they live up to that. But I want to see what Rukaroro can do. I want to see what Brandon Dorlus can do. I want to give those guys at least a year to at least get an opportunity to sort of show, okay, what exactly do we have in this? So finding a pass rushing D tackle, you bring in a veteran like Morgan Fox is not necessarily a priority for me. So for me, it's like I need a run plugger. And, I'm going to go deeper into some film to look at some of these mid-round guys, but sort of the one guy that I have watched so far out of Texas, Alfred Collins, he's like 330 pounds, has played up and down that defensive line. To me, he's like a plug and play run defender. Like he's a really good run defender. And
they won two down guy.
Yeah.
They won.
He's not bringing really much of anything as a pass rusher, but like for the Falcons, I don't need you to be, again, ideally you would be that sort of all around 3-down player. Someone like a Kenneth Grant out of Michigan fits more that 3-down nose tackle prototype and whatnot. And so I would not be upset at all if the Falcons drafted Kenneth Grant really at all. But in terms of just like plug and play run defender, I know this guy can handle double teams. I know this guy can play multiple techniques and control the point of attack and the control the line of scrimmage. I think Alfred Collins is one guy that I've seen out of Texas that really stands out, and that is something that I do think the Falcons are sorely lacking up front.
Yeah, I think having that run stuffer type guy and being that 2-down player, right? And I think that having him in or bringing a guy like that in helps this defense in so many ways, right? For the first one, you're taking up blocks, right? 330-pound guy. Hey, somebody better be double teaming him. If he's not drawing a double team, he'll need to be in there. He'll need to be on this squad if he's not drawing a double team with that type of size, right? And I've been checking out, a guy like Alfred Collins. I haven't got a chance to do a deep dive, but from a scheme standpoint, regardless of what scheme it is, 3-4, 4-3, nickel, whatever you're running out there, if you have a guy like that can eat up a double team, that's one less blocker that Caden Ellis has to worry about. That's one less blocker that Devon Diablo has to worry about. There's one less blocker that Troy Anderson has to worry about if he's on the field. So I think there is, when you bringing a guy like that in, that is the one thing that you need to have in order for, like we talked about earlier, to be able to have an impact in year one under Jeff Ulbrich's regime. And I think that's the main thing that they kind of have to take a look at. But I got a guy another guy that on the offensive side, from the offensive tackle standpoint, Ariante Ursary. He was gotten down to the Senior Bowl too. I like how he looked in pass pro. He's a long guy, out of Minnesota. He's just one of those tackles that, like you said, you don't have to worry about putting the pressure on him to come in and start right away, like on the defense side of the football, specifically in the early rounds. But he's a guy a mid-round prospect that can come in and do one specific thing pretty well. And I feel like him in pass pro is something that he can do really well from day one. But like I said, you don't need him to come in and play right away. But so have you looked at any other guys from an offensive tackle position that you feel that would be available in those mid rounds?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a couple of Senior Bowl guys that stood out during that week that I saw as sort of developmental options in those mid rounds. You mentioned one of them in Carson Vincent out of Alabama A&M. Anthony Belton from NC State. It was another guy that stood out to me in the practices, has a little bit more size, and coming from that NC State offense that generally has been, they run a lot of outside zone over the years because of their past with Dwayne Ledford almost a decade ago, sort of installing that offense and sort of carrying that through these last couple of years as well. So he's at least comfortable in the sort of style of offense and run game that the Falcons can operate, and also brings that sort of size that the Falcons may be lacking up front that can operate in various other run schemes if you want him to be more of that sort of downhill gap run blocker and whatnot. So he's a guy that's been steadily on my radar at that offensive tackle position, and feels like he'll probably potentially still be there in the fourth round, which is really the sort of time when you take a tackle in the third or fourth round. Like if you teams tend to draft tackles, if they expect that guy to start right away, that's like a first or second round pick, right?
Sure.
And we talked about this, Jarvis, with the Chiefs last year. They used a second round pick on Kingsley Suamataia, and it didn't quite work out for them. And now they're scrambling to sort of solve that left tackle position. And then usually in the third or fourth round, because of the premium at the tackle position, those guys get pushed up. And so like for other positions, you'll take the developmental guy in like the fifth or sixth round. But for tackles, it's like third round because of the premium at the position. So I do feel like some of these guys, like an Anthony Belton, a Carson Vincent or whatever, you would say, oh, they're developmental tackles. They're not necessarily plug and play, but these guys are probably going to go earlier than people think just because teams are desperate to find tackles. You think about the Falcons a couple of years ago when they brought in Storm Norton. That summer, they were desperate trying to find a tackle because basically like teams do not let good tackles go out the door really at all because of the premium at that position. So if the Falcons want to not find themselves in a similar predicament in the future, I do think taking a tackle in this year's draft makes a ton of sense.
1,000%. I'm with you on that. Coming up next, should the Falcons rest on their laurels when it comes to Ryan Neuzil? We'll discuss.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
It is the Atlanta Football Party, and we want to say thank you for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you download your podcast, and wherever you download your podcast, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. Really appreciate that from you in advance. Now, the Atlanta Falcons tagged Ryan Neuzil with the first right of first refusal, which is essentially going to bring him about $3.2 million if another team doesn't come in and sweeps him off his feet and the Falcons don't match that particular offer. But the thing, like I mentioned going to break, Free, I feel like selling on a guy like Ryan Neuzil, who came in for you for 8 games last year and was fine. He was a fine replacement for Drew Dalman. We did see a little dip in those run numbers for average, right? Bijan Robinson specifically. But do you feel like that needs to be where, hey, this is who we're going with? We know more than likely no one is going to come in and give him a big offer. And, hey, we're perfectly fine going into the 2025 season with Ryan Neuzil as our quarterback being paid $3 million.
I am not comfortable with Ryan Neuzil as the starting center for the Falcons, or at least the uncontested starting center for the Atlanta Falcons.
Yep.
But I kind of feel like the ship sailed on the Falcons being able to find somebody that could come in, and because like we've seen it time and time again across the league. You saw it this offseason with Drew Dalman going to Chicago. Like teams love pairing young quarterbacks with veteran centers because those centers can take a lot more off that quarterback's plate when it comes to dealing with protections and dealing with blitzes and whatnot. And, Ryan Neuzil's been around for a couple of years, so it's not like he's completely new to this, and obviously had plenty of opportunities these last 2 years filling in for Drew Dalman to step in there. But, like, he's far from proven in that regard. And so for me, like, the best path forward for the Falcons at center was to probably sign some veteran player that could come in and be that sort of stopgap, even if it's for a year, just to get you through this season. And they didn't necessarily do that. And the center market is basically dried up at this point in time. It's like, it's David Andrews, formerly of the Patriots, and he might retire. He's been dealing with a lot of injuries the last couple of years. Georgia guy, but like, you can't really bet on David Andrews at this point in his career, given all his injury history and his age, to be that reliable option. And so to me, Ryan Neuzil versus a rookie center, while I think you could draft somebody who's definitely more talented than Ryan Neuzil as a former undrafted free agent, is that guy going to come in day one and be that answer at center? Maybe. Again, like that's a risk and that's a gamble. And so, it does feel like if the Falcons were going to find an upgrade at Ryan Neuzil, that would have happened, 2 weeks ago, as opposed to, a month from now when the draft happened. So I am not comfortable with Ryan Neuzil for a lot of reasons you suggested, Jarvis. The run game did take a significant dip without Drew Dalman in the lineup. And, I think it's going to be important for the Falcons with hopefully increased play action and, relying on the run game with the first-year starting quarterback and Michael Penix. Like, I don't, I would love to see Michael Penix dropping back 50 times a game and throwing for 300 yards every single week, but I don't think that's a realistic expectation at this point. No.
And Robinson probably would too sometimes.
Yeah. So it's like, I think the run game is going to be important. And the fact that, as you mentioned, there was a significant difference between Neuzil and Dahlman last year, particularly when you faced better defenses. It just felt like when teams had good defensive lines that were actually good at stopping the run, like the Falcons struggled a lot more to generate those rushing yards against those teams when Neuzil was in the lineup versus when Dahlman was in the lineup last year. So I am not comfortable with Ryan Neuzil, but I kind of feel like now it's like the Falcons don't really have a great a path to get me comfortable. So I'm just going to have to spend the next 4 months trying to get comfortable with Ryan Neuzil being the Falcons starting center.
I think that to kind of bring in, I'm with you. I'm not comfortable with him saying, hey, you're the presumed starter, write it in pen, and then we're just going to move on. No, I'm not comfortable with that at all. However, I do feel like there's still a window after the draft. If they aren't able to get their guy who they want to bring in, and not necessarily like an offensive tackle spot, okay, we don't feel that, this is not me talking, this is the Falcons talking. We don't feel that we got a guy that we have to bring in a guy that can come in and immediately start for us at the center spot. But, oh my gosh, we definitely want to bring someone in that has the potential to be that guy in the near future. So I feel like if they aren't able to get that type of guy in the draft, I feel I won't be surprised if they pick up the phone, because we know the Falcons don't mind making late signings, right? They traded for, they traded for Matthew Judon and got Justin Simmons right before the season starts. So I think there's still a window for them to bring in a guy, because I will say this continuously. I love the way they handled the Young Wei Koo situation here in this offseason, bringing in someone that could potentially be his replacement, because you got to have that competition. You got to have guys on the roster that can replace guys that are getting older, guys that aren't having great seasons, or the guys that aren't performing like you expect them to. So I feel like they should handle this the same way with Ryan Neuzil. Hey, if we aren't able to get someone in the draft that can come in potentially uproot you at that particular spot, I feel like there is, a window still after the draft that they can bring someone in, a veteran in. If David Andrews decides, hey, I still got something left in the tank, yeah, come on down come on down here, get you a couple mil, throw a couple mil in your pocket and see what happens. And you hope you strike gold, because that's where you are financially, right? From a salary cap standpoint, you got to hit on these veterans on these 1-year deals. You hope Leonard Floyd does the same thing. So all of those things come into play once the draft is over, and I think we'll have a very clear picture as to how they really feel about Ryan Neuzil once the draft is complete. But we're going to wrap things up, though, talking about a couple things. I know I'm not supposed to tease two different topics, but hey, this is what we're going to roll with today, because Free is free in here, and it's all his fault. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. Me take responsibility for how the show goes? No way possible, sir. This is how we're going to do it. So, all right, we're going to talk about one of the Raheem Morris and whether or not, how did he miss his flight? When did he miss his flight? And we're going to play a little game called Where's Kirk Cousins? Like I mentioned earlier, we are finishing up on this live edition of the Atlanta Football Party. And we want to say thank you guys for not only watching us on YouTube, but downloading us on wherever you download us on your podcast platform for free. We ain't gonna charge you for this stuff. We know we could, but we're not gonna do that for you today, especially when I'm hosting, because this thing can get off the rails. But we're gonna wrap this thing up real quick. All right, Free. So scrolling through social media, kind of give you my mindset, right? Mm-hmm. Scrolling through social media over the weekend, I see Kirk's face. I was like, oh, I just seen you, a little bit a while ago. Last time I seen your face, You know, you were taking pictures with the president, and then, you know, you were saying that, hey, you just met with Arthur Blank, and you're trying to be a starting quarterback. But Kirk Cousins, is it the Chipotle in Cleveland taking pictures free? What on earth is going on? Why is Kirk in Cleveland? Well, I mean, help me out here, man.
Well, you know, multiple NFL reporters have said it had nothing to do with the Browns because the Browns brass was elsewhere, you know, watching draft prospects and whatnot. So he was not there in Cleveland to meet with the Browns. But I feel, you know, tell me if I'm going. I don't think this is a deep conspiracy, but I feel like it's Browns adjacent. You know, if you're Kirk and you're like, hopefully my future is not in Atlanta at this point in time.
Yes.
You know, just go check out Cleveland and see what the real estate situation is like, you know, just like, hey, just fly in for a weekend or whatever, a couple of days, make some phone calls, see some houses, and pop back down to the in-laws house in Marietta or wherever it is. And, you know, just check it out. So that's what I'm assuming Kirk was doing, you know. I mean, you know, no offense to Cleveland. Maybe he was visiting the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Maybe, you know, he heard about the whole Outcast thing. Kirk wanted to go see what that was like. So again, there's a lot of reasons out there, but the real estate one is the one that to me has the most teeth. But I don't know about you, Jarvis.
Maybe his wife is, you know, looking for another team to be a fan of, because we know that, hey, that's one of the main reasons why he chose to come to Atlanta, because not for the $100 million guaranteed bread.
That had nothing to do with it.
You know, that had nothing to do with it. But for his family, her family being big time Falcons fans, and, you know, this is what we do. Give me one for the gusto, and I can get a Super Bowl ring, and I could be on the quarterback, you know, show, and it just be a beautiful, beautiful, just production and all that good stuff. But we all know that did not happen. But yeah, man, you know, maybe she's looking to be a fan of the Browns for whatever reason, right? Yeah, but I just thought that was kind of very a little weird, you know, that this man out here taking selfies, just being Kirk, just smiling like ain't nothing going on. He's all, man, ain't nothing, you know, it's all, take a picture. Then he pops up at another spot. It's just like, hey, this is what we're doing. Yeah, man. I like Kirk, man. I know a lot of Falcons fans don't feel the same way, but man, oh my gosh, just the self-awareness sometimes, it just seems to be non-existent. Speaking of non-existent, you know, the owners meeting, you know, had popped off. They started, and you know, they generally take a picture of all the coaches, you know, to start the thing, kick it off, right? Like, hey, all the coaches here taking a picture, you know, it's school picture day and all that stuff. But it was only 31 of them free. There's only 31 coaches in the thing, you know, counting. No Raheem Morris. Man, what is going on, man? You got Kirko and Cleveland trying to get some chips and guap, and then you have a Raheem Morris who's a no-show down in Florida at the owners' meetings. What is going on, man?
Well, you know, as we were starting the show, Jarvis, as you and Tori were, whatever we were talking about in the first segment, Nate Ollie or whatever, I'm just on Google the whole time, just trying to figure out, you know, where was there severe weather in the United States on Sunday morning? Yes. And I'm like seeing like hurricanes in Texas, and I'm just like, Texas, that's an interesting place to be. Like maybe you were at Texas A&M, or maybe you were at UT or something.
Kicking it with Shamar, you know?
You know, something like that. Like you know, there's a couple of guys. There's a couple. We talk about Alfred Collins, you know,
scouting, you know,
or whatever. So I'm just like, you know, maybe he's hanging out, doing a private workout or something somewhere in the middle of the United States, right? Because it was a lot of severe weather that's now moving towards the East Coast today. I'm sure many people watching will see it and whatnot. So I'm just sitting there going like, you know, just trying to connect the dots. And I'm just like, Texas is an interesting place to be at this time of year, working out maybe some prospects. So I don't know.
Yeah, man. This is, I don't think this is that as big of a deal as I probably made it out to be, but it's just typical Falcony stuff, man. It's just something else not to talk about when it comes to football related stuff. Like, right, you know what? I want to hear about Raheem Morris talking about why they did the first right of refusal tag on Ryan Neuzil. And what is his prospect as being the starting center? Or does that mean he's the starting center, with no competition? But we up here talking about where was he? Where was Raheem? Where was Raheem? Because in Atlanta, the weather was fine on Sunday morning. So, hey, man. Hey, it happens. It happens though. I'm a human being. I give grace. You know what I'm saying? So hey, Raheem Morris, it's okay. Just kind of let's bring it back, man. Just bring it back. Football. They're expected to meet on Tuesday. So, we will definitely get a chance to download on all what happened right here on Atlanta Football Party on Thursday. And Tanisha will be back. So we appreciate you guys for checking us out, again, making your first listen of the day. And why don't you check out my main man, Aaron Freeman, on Locked On Falcons as the second listen of the day. And can I drop another one in on you? The NFL draft guys? Man, come on, man. Y'all got to check those guys out as well, giving you everything you need to have and need to know as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, which we know all eyes will be on the Falcons and who they pick at the 15th overall pick. And we want to say thank you, and we will see you guys on Thursday.